I've always had an ear for stories that I've heard or people and events that I remember from my childhood. So I finally sat down and wrote up his first 17 years of my life. I'm one of 4 boys raised a long time ago in the mountains of North Carolina, in Greenville, South Carolina, and the final years before I went off to college on a sharecropper farm that my father bought in Walhalla, South Carolina. I have complicated thoughts about my father. He had lived a life as sort of an intellectual hermit in the mountains after he had made a good deal of money way before I was born. He didn't get married until he was 49 and immediately had 4 children, and I think this was such an intrusion on a man who was a private person and an artistic person. I think it really came as a horrible shock to him, and he could hardly handle it. One day, a black LaSalle limousine rolled up at our cabin, and out of it emerged a woman, Mrs. S.P.B. Snell of Clearwater, Florida. She wanted to build an inn in the mountains. He sold her 100 acres of land, and he was to build the hotel, and she was to run it. It was a very first-class structure, quite elaborate for the mountains. Daddy had a violent temper, and he had been pretty harsh on a number of people in the mountains over the years, and I think this may have contributed to our being burned out. There was no insurance on the hotel and no money to replace it. It essentially meant that we would have to sell out. The burning of the hotel changed our life forever. In the country, the schools only went 6 or 7 grades, and the teachers often had 2 years of education, and it was finally decided that when we became 6, we would each go down the mountain 40 miles and live with Aunt Bess and Aunt Ann and go to Anderson Street School in Greenville. In 1940, when I arrived at 212 Anderson Street, Bess is 61 and Ann is 54. On my first day alone with Bess, she lays her hands on my shoulders, squares me up in front of her and says, "Now you listen here. I promised your daddy I'd see to it you don't get kidnapped or run over by a kyar." She calls cars kyars. "You are not to leave this yard or be out of my sight, and that's the word with a bark on it. Do you understand?" Holding my shoulders so tight her hard bony knuckles turn white, she waits until I nod my head. Bess, I think, was mentally ill, and my father didn't ever seem to know this. He just used to say, "Well, she's just a Bessie, that's all." My father eventually bought a big farm 80 miles away in the lower country at the foot of the mountains, and he saw the farm as a place to raise us as he had been raised long ago. He was worried about contemporary society, of us getting into trouble with the wrong people in town, and he thought that we should learn the skills he had learned and that it was good training and discipline for us, and that was the center of our life. One of the outstanding points about my book is that it's a description of a way of life that has virtually disappeared.
All of the wagon tracks around the church are gone.